live because my last one for Friday wasn't very long, and I figured I would take the time to discuss, really just mill over all the different topics discussed on this channel and why these different topics have been covered so extensively. Because really and truly, most people don't really understand what is coming in the future. And what is coming in the future for sure is definitely going to be one hell of a catastrophe, because we are going to be embroiled in not only a collapse, but a second American civil conflict, which will be a Syrian style, as in multi-factional conflict. Good morning, Welder Princess. Yes, I'm glad you're here. Welcome. But it'll be a multi-factional Syrian-style internal conflict. And I'm going to go into all the details on how such a thing would basically arise and what type of instances and situations would actually create such a catastrophe as a second American civil conflict. And then following that, what'll bring on the foreign invasion, which will be drastically bigger, vastly bigger. And a lot of people don't understand the ramifications of that, because a lot of people are stuck on this whole great reset and all this other bunk BS. But it's not going to happen like that, because if you go by common sense of what's actually happening right now, and you go by the word tells us much differently. These Western elites are not going to win out. It's actually going to be the Eastern elites who win out, which are your 10 kings of Revelation, who defeat the West in a third world war and all unite to give their power unto the beast. That is what's going to happen. And everybody needs to know how to navigate that, because that is the real future that we actually face. There is not going to be a Western Great Reset. In fact, the Western elites are going to be they who suffer like Valerian, the Roman emperor, suffered at the hands of the Persians. Only this time, these Western elites are going to be taken out of their hidey holes, their DUMBs. They're going to be captured by the Chinese and the Russians, and they're going to be humiliated by them. They will be. They will end up in Chi-Com Lao guys or in Russian gulags, and they're going to become Xi Jinping's footstool. I'm sure he'll do that on a rotational basis when he's on his gold and red throne. China is the dragon in the Bible. It's the physical manifestation of the dragon in the Bible. The spiritual manifestation is actually Satan, but in the physical, it's China. Well, why would that be? Because China's the most powerful nation on the face of the earth that the world's ever seen. So Satan is going to use the most powerful nation in the world, which is communist China, to be his puppet. And he's going to use it to destroy much of the world. There is going to be an army, yes, Welder Princess, of 200 million. There's only one nation in the world that could field such an army. That is Red China, the Red Dragon. I warn about China because they're the biggest threat that the world has ever known. And a lot of people can't grasp that. A lot of people don't understand that. But they have to understand. Oh, no, you're good, Welder Princess. Yes, but it's 200 million. Only China could field that, because only China has 40% of the entire world's industrial base, from which they have the biggest military-industrial complex on the face of the earth. They're not collapsing. China's not collapsing. That's a lie. Actually, China is basically on the up and up still, because their currency, they already have trillions of dollars worth of gold. They're the single biggest gold holder on the face of the earth. China is. Guess what? They have 6,400 plus tons of gold. It's impossible for China to be broke. Not only that, but the Saudis did say that they would take the petro yuan. There will be a petro yuan renminbi, the Chinese currency. So China's about to get all the benefits that we used to get from the petrodollar. But now China's going to get the same benefits because all the OPEC nations are going to basically sell their oil in yuan. They're going to settle the oil in yuan renminbi. That's the Chinese currency, and other currencies too, but the Chinese predominantly are the big one because China is going to be the biggest single importer of oil on the face of the earth, and all of OPEC is lining up to be China's supplier of oil, along with Russia, who already supplies China with a surplus of oil. Russia has doubled oil exports to China, and China, with its ginormous industrial base, ginormous military industrial complex, now the biggest in the world for the past 5 years, also the biggest population in the world. India's close, but China still has more people. But China has the ability to raise ginormous armies because China has this massive industry. They can produce rifles, mortars, artillery, tanks, APCs, IFVs, aircraft, especially ships, everything. China can pump it all out like it's nobody's business, and they have been. Now they have the world's single biggest navy, and it's the most technologically advanced navy in terms of the electronic warfare, the weapons capabilities on board these ships, the ability of their submarines to be silent, undetected. I mean, China is the world's superpower. They are. They have surpassed us in real terms. China has the biggest middle class now on the face of the earth. China has 900 million people that are considered middle class in China now. Can you believe that? They have the biggest middle class on the face of the earth. They also have the world's most billionaires. China does. China has the most largest burgeoning technology sector too. They're already far ahead when it comes to directed energy weapons, lasers and such. Also when it comes to creating miniature artificial stars, which they're using to harness for energy. They've already demonstrated that by releasing them into the air. Let's see, what else? China has already taken hypersonic weapons to the next level with fractional orbital bombardment. Remember, China doesn't have to have the biggest nuclear arsenal on Earth. They just have to have nukes that all work and have superb means of delivery. And fractional orbital bombardment is about as advanced as it gets. They have regular hypersonics, but they also have fractional orbital bombardment. That's what the 77th Long March rocket testing was. That was testing their fractional orbital bombardment, where they fire a rocket and then it detaches in the high Earth atmosphere. It detaches a hypersonic glide vehicle which circumnavigates the Earth and hits its target. They've done this a few times to where they've fine-tuned it to where it's basically a completed weapon. They now have it. They've mastered this technology. So China also, you know, they have the same stealth technology we do. They have stealth bombers. They have two types of stealth fighter aircraft. China is a monster. They're a monster. And people just don't understand that. This is why I always warn about China. Plus, they're insidious. They're getting into everything. They're infiltrating everything. They've infiltrated basically every American multinational corporation with CCP regime members sitting on the corporate boards. They're directly creating policies that influence everything that goes on in this country, whether you realize it or not. You know, they're already shaping the battlefield. By what I mean by shaping the battlefield, they're getting America softened up for the day when they invade. They want it to be nice and easy. They want us to be acclimated to Chinese communism, and they're slowly but surely spreading their ideology throughout this country. Not only that, but they have many allies too who hate us, like Russia, like Pakistan, like North Korea, like Belarus. like Iran, Syria. They have all these different allies that hate us, that are going to partake when they invade this country to turn it into new China. They're going to have allies here too on their CCP regime properties, which are jumping off points for their invasion. They're already bought near their objectives so that when their units, their Trojan shock units, leave these places, they're within striking distance of all their main objectives. I've already shown this in my hypothetical scenarios. I've shown it throughout all my work on this channel. It's all over the channel. All you have to do is go watch 96 Hour Invasion, which is a, 36 video hypothetical documentary. There's also the Pacific Northwest one, which is a continuation of the 96 Hour Invasion documentary, which that's 10 videos. It's relatively short, but, those show with maps how these units, these battalion-sized units, begin on CCP regime properties, whether it's farms, ranches, abandoned factories that they bought, whatever. It can be warehouses. Anything that they've bought converts into a base, a fob, or a logistical center from which they can launch their Trojan shock army invasion. These will be PLA units, PAP units, maybe Chi-Com National Militia, which is sort of like their paramilitary version of like what our National Guard is. All these different Chinese subunits of military and paramilitary will be here on CCP properties for when they invade. Absolutely they will. So there's no refuting that. It's all part of their civil-military fusion policy, which I've also explained many, many, many times. So what that means, what that entails, is that these CCP properties bought by the Chinese regime all turn into bases. Any mode, means of transportation, which is civilian in nature, can likewise be converted for military transport. So what that means is if, say, if China, they already have the biggest navy in the world, but say they want additional transport shipping. So what that means is that they'll take these civilian cargo ships and tankers and ferries and whatever else, fishing boats. They can use whatever they want to use. And they can pack them with troops and they can send them to wherever they need to send them. Same thing with land vehicles and everything else for transport. China has this immense capability to wage a global war. They already have forces all over the world in disguise or openly, especially in Africa, but also increasingly throughout Asia too, because in Iran, China already has 50,000 troops. That's already been done in that 2020 deal between China and Iran, where China gets to base troops in Iran and also has oil interests in Iran. A lot of the oil actually that China produces from their oil companies, their subsidiaries of their regime, come from Iran because they've already made deals with Iran to help Iran develop their industries in return for China being able to take a certain percentage of their oil and use it and also base their troops there. They're about to do the same thing in Saudi. Mohammed bin Salman is moving ever closer to China, and China is a mediator in terms of mediating some sort of a peace between Iran and Saudi, because China wants both of them under their umbrella. So they're mediating a sort of peace settlement, along with Russia helping, because Russia is also involved there. They're mediating a sort of peace settlement between the Saudis and Iranians, because there had been some sort of a ongoing like Cold War type of deal in the Middle East between Iran and Saudi, where they both supported opposite sides in proxy conflicts like in Yemen, like in Syria. You had all kinds of different things flaring up between those two, but China's trying to play peacemaker and come in there and basically create a peace so that all of OPEC will become part of BRICS Plus. BRICS Plus is already making the one world currency. It'll be a Chinese and Russian-led initiative to create this one world currency, this BRICS Plus currency. There is not going to be a Western New World Order. These Western elites will be crushed, and they will end up in Chinese Lao guys, because evil has always destroyed other evil. That's always been the case, and it always will be. Even in the Word, that's a steady theme. Evil always destroys other evil because evil gets greedy. Evil lusts for power. Evil can never stop. It always wants more and more and more, and it won't stop until it gets what it wants. And even then, it's never satiated. It has to keep going and going. So what that means is that these rival elites, because things are different in the East than they are in the West. In the East, the regimes in the East control the issuance of their currency, which means that the elites of the East are within the regimes themselves. Like in China, for instance, the CCP, the Politburo, is China's elites. They're the trillionaires of China, like Xi and his upper crust, his regime cronies. And then others have said, I've heard it said, that Putin might even be the wealthiest man on earth in terms of not just his liquid assets, but all the hard assets he possesses. So there's wealthy Russians too. There's different elites around the world, and they're all competing. And the West is not going to win, because while they were busy destroying their own power base, the Eastern elites were busy building theirs up. And they've far surpassed us, and there's nothing we can do about it other than get ourselves prepared, because the day is going to come when my audiobook, when my map scenarios all come to pass. So I'm going to take some time and say hello to people. I missed a lot of people coming in. Yes, Welder Princess, Blue Eyes, Unorthodox, and hey, Ken, Fear No Man, good to see you. And Wild Animus, and Wendy Fowler, and Paula Nitz, and let's see, El Romero, and Aaron James, great to see you, of course. Well, welcome everybody, and Wild Animus. Yeah, so what's going to happen is that the West is going to be destroyed in World War III. That's inevitable. It's going to happen. And right now, with what Russia's doing in this proxy conflict, by grinding the West down, by getting it to send all of this equipment, all of this ammunition into this proxy conflict just for it to be destroyed, is exactly what's been happening. And it's going to eventually have to stop, because the West is going to run out of things to send. Even with the tanks that they're trying to send, there is such a holdup with all of this stuff, because there's so little of it to send. They have to refurbish some of it. The Germans do, what they had in storage, what they're able to even send. That equipment might not even arrive for a whole year, and by then this conflict will be over and done with. So even if they sent it now, before a year had elapsed, you just have it, be destroyed. It would all be destroyed, just like everything else that's been sent. Either destroyed, or it's going to end up in a third country, because it'll be hawked off on the black market by weapons dealers. So yes, all this money, Aaron, you're right, all this money that that's right, Welder Princess. It's called shaping the battlefield. Or you say softening, but it's the same thing, yeah. It's shaping the battlefield. That's what the Chinese and Russians are doing by getting the West to commit all its very limited, finite resources and remaining money into this proxy conflict, because we're literally propping up the whole national economy of that proxy country, believe it or not. We are. We're propping that entire economy up in that proxy country. So basically, while we send all this money over there, we have our country's infrastructure totally going to absolute shit, collapsing. We had all these troubles with Jackson, Mississippi, with their water issue, and apparently that's not resolved. So they're talking about resettling people, like I've said before months ago. That's still an issue there. The whole water problem that they've had. Also, all that happened in Florida, that all ain't been fixed yet. And the actual damage report for that winter storm that occurred back in 2020 in Texas actually just had come out on the news. It cost tens of billions in damage, upwards of $50 billion in damage from all the burst pipes and plumbing that ruined buildings when that storm happened 2 years back, or actually 3 years now. So things like that are just making this country rot and go to absolute shit while our enemies have built up. The Chinese do not give a damn about no green energy. They don't care about rainbow people. They don't give a damn about none of that. They're not doing any of that in China. All China cares about is destroying the West. And Xi Jinping has even actually said that out of his own mouth. He said his main goal is to destroy America. He said that. He actually said that. You know, it is bad enough that Wei Feng gave an entire speech, the Chi-Com defense minister gave an entire speech about colonizing the United States and genociding its people or enslaving them. Wei Feng, Chi-Com defense minister, sure as hell did in his speech. That sounds like when Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler in Nazi Germany talked about their war of extermination in the East when they wanted to invade the Soviet Union and enslave the Soviet people or wipe them all out off the map. That was what Operation Barbarossa was about. It was called a Vernichtungskrieg, which means a war of extermination. And that's exactly what the Chinese are going to wage on us. And people don't realize it. They're so absorbed in their bullshit, their day-to-day nonsense. I know I'm a bit serious right now, and I have a serious tone, but that's because this is very serious. All the stuff I've done on this channel is very dire. It's very real. A lot of people don't understand that. But all this that I've done on this channel, this is real shit. This is stuff that people better be paying attention to. You know, I hate to get all, you know, aggressive sounding about it, but I mean, I don't know how else to put it. This is real. You know, this is very real. This is very dire. The Chinese and their allies are going to wage a Vernichtungskrieg, a war of extermination, and they will turn this in to New China. It's in the word, too. It's in Jeremiah. Jeremiah says that our mighty men, our soldiers, will be as women, and they'll be hiding in the keeps, which are like the barracks. The keeps, you know, like the towers, well, the barracks, they'll be hiding in the keeps when the Chinese come here. They're going to be coming from a foreign land speaking a language that our people don't understand. Gee, that sounds like Mandarin Chinese to me, or maybe Russian too. You know, it's going to be a coalition of nations that come from the north, which is over the North Pole. There's your Russia, there's your China, there's your North Korea, there's your Belarus, there's your, you know, Iran, Pakistan, you know, and some of those countries owe China for everything. North Korea owes China for its entire existence. So North Korea is going to go wherever China goes. Same thing with Pakistan. Pakistan owes China for keeping India in check for many years, and also for going into Pakistan and modernizing their war industry. So everywhere Pakistan or China goes, Pakistan is going to go too. Same with North Korea. They're going to go too. And also Russia and China are thick as thieves. So they're both going to do all kinds of things together. They're going to destroy the West together. And it's not just the United States. It's also Western Europe and Oceania, which is Australia and New Zealand. That's Oceania. That's the continent. But Western Europe is going to be basically annihilated because they've neglected their militaries for 2 decades. When the Cold War ended, they literally just let their militaries go to absolute garbage. Like they've not spent the money. You have to maintain your military. It costs money to maintain a military. You can't just not maintain your equipment. You can't just not spend money on logistics, on ammunition. You can't do that. You know, if you don't do that, you're not going to have a military worth a damn. You have to have fuel. You have to have logistics. You have to have ammunition. You have to have maintenance, constant maintenance. You might have badass equipment, but that badass equipment's going to break down. Wear and tear. It happens. Then you need to maintain it. It costs money. The German Bundeswehr is notorious for letting itself go to absolute trash because they don't spend the money that they need to spend on their freaking military to keep it for the upkeep. They have some nice submarines, even though they have very few submarines, but they have some nice submarines, diesel electric subs that are very quiet, very capable. But, they only have one in working condition because they haven't maintained their subfleet, their little subfleet, or the rest of their Navy for that matter, or their Air Force. At any given time in the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, there's only, several squadrons of aircraft that are even in workable flying condition because the rest aren't being maintained. You know what that means? It means in an all-out war, they're not going to be able to scramble all their aircraft, which means that the enemy, Russia, China, Belarus, they're going to have air superiority because they put their military as the highest priority, whereas the West has neglected their armed forces. At reunification of Germany, when East and West Germany reunited to be one Germany again, on paper, the Germans had the second biggest military on the continent of Europe in terms of all their equipment and personnel. For a country the size of Germany, 1 million personnel with active and reserve numbers of East and West Germany merging, amalgamating, and all the equipment, all the tanks they had 7,500 main battle tanks. They had thousands of artillery pieces. It was upwards of like 7,000 something. They also had a big Air Force and a big Navy. You know what they did? They sold off about 80% of all the equipment they had, both from East and West Germany after they amalgamated. And they did that over a period of about 10 to 15 years. And now they have this slimmed down, nothing-ass army that can't do anything. They could hardly defend a single town, as somebody put it. It would take the entire German military, somebody once joked, said it could only defend a small town. Like their whole military combined, And that sounds about right. I mean, I know it was a joke, but it sounds about right because they've neglected their armed forces. They've let the Bundeswehr go to absolute trash. And it's not just the Germans. It's also the Italians. It's also the British. It's also the French. In the NATO war games, Britain and France run out of howitzer artillery shells. In 8 days, they exhaust their national supply. 8 days. Can you fathom that? That's a week and a day, and they're out of artillery shells. You can't fight a war without artillery, And also, it exposed our weakness, too. Because before we gave like 2/3 of all our howitzer artillery stockpiles to this proxy conflict, before that, in a high-intensity war, we may have had enough artillery for us to wage about a 2-month, sustained high-intensity conflict, wherein you're shooting like non-stop artillery fire missions at your enemy, non-stop, like high intensity. We're talking like 24 hours around the clock artillery usage, except for when you have to maintain the guns and, put the fluids in it, the cherry juice, hydraulic stuff and everything. But I'm saying when you're not maintaining the guns in a high intensity conflict, you're going to be using them non-stop on fire missions. Your FDC is going to be sending you down all kinds of missions, to fire. And, we gave away all this howitzer artillery ammunition and rocket artillery ammunition, which means that we're not going to have any artillery for a high-intensity war. So when we get invaded, we're going to get smashed, and smashed badly. We didn't even have that much artillery to even begin with, and you cannot, and I'm telling you, you cannot fight a war without artillery. You just can't. You can't. Combined arms tactics require it. So our enemies focused heavy on artillery. China and Russia both have the most artillery in the world. They're both roughly equal in terms of artillery piece numbers, in terms of their howitzers and rocket artillery, all combined. They're roughly equal in the number of artillery pieces, China and Russia. So they have the biggest artillery arms in the entire world. And both of them have, see, Russia has a billion with a B, howitzer shells of different sizes. 1 billion. Literally, Russia could shoot 20 to 50,000 howitzer shells a day, like they're doing in this proxy conflict, and they wouldn't run out of shells for almost 40 years. You know what that means? China has immensely more than Russia because of their industry. Because of China's industry. They have more than Russia. We're talking over $1 billion in terms of the ammunition, howitzer, and rocket. China's military-industrial complex is ginormous. There's no words for the size of it. They built factories from the end of the 90s until 5 years ago, and now 6 years ago, about 2017, 2018, all these just freakishly massive industrial complexes all came online. Hundreds of them, in addition to what they already had. China already had a decent-sized military-industrial complex, even in the 90s, you know, for building tanks and artillery and aircraft and ammunition. But when they expanded that, like at least twofold, my God, man. I mean, right now, their capabilities to manufacture all kinds of ammunition types, munitions like artillery, aircraft munitions for, you know, whether guided or unguided, or whether it's air-to-ground missiles or air-to-air missiles, whatever. You know, we're talking this gargantuan capacity to manufacture tanks, APCs, IFVs, aircraft. China produces the most aluminum on the face of the earth. 38.5 million tons of aluminum. They're the single biggest manufacturer of aluminum. Guess what aluminum's used in? Aircraft manufacturing. China is the biggest single producer of tungsten by a huge margin. Tungsten is one of the hardest known metals on Earth when you add a binding agent to it. It's like gold. Gold is extremely hard, but when you have 100% gold, it's brittle, like dust. But same thing with tungsten. But when tungsten is added to nickel, like a binding agent, tungsten is one of the hardest metals known to man. That's used in sabot ammunition for tanks. It's extremely powerful as an ammunition. It's used for armor-piercing bullets for like machine guns, rifles, and such. They make that. Yes, tungsten is very, very important in war production, Welder Princess. Very important. You're right. So they also can use it in armor, in their rolled homogeneous steel armor for their tanks. That means that if they put a small percentage of tungsten in their rolled steel armor, their rolled homogeneous armor for tank production, they're going to have some of the strongest tank armor for their main battle tanks on the face of the earth. Stronger than depleted uranium armor, like is used in our tanks. And they also have it for their ammunition, like sabot rounds, bullets, and such. They're the biggest manufacturer of tungsten on the face of the earth by a gargantuan margin. China produces 66 million metric tons of tungsten. Or I'm sorry, 1,000. And Vietnam is 4,500 tons of tungsten. That's the next biggest producer after China. So then, China's the biggest steel producer in the world too. Of course, steel is used in everything in military production. China produces so much steel, it produces literally more steel than the next 20 biggest steel-producing nations combined. Combined. Over 1 billion tons of steel annually. Over 1 billion. You know, the United States produces, it fluctuates between 73 million and about 79 million when it comes to tons of steel annually produced. China's 1 billion with a B. So, what else? Covered the aluminum, titanium. That's another thing. China's the biggest titanium producer and the biggest zinc producer. The titanium is 110,000 metric tons of titanium annually. That's enormous. That's over half, just barely over half of the entire world's titanium production. So China, they have all of these secret weapons too. And their electronic warfare capabilities are immense. I told you about what Mumian Island did to those F-35s. Well, you know, when it comes to electronic warfare, there are systems that generate electromagnetic fields that are used to interfere directly with the circuits. That's basically what the Russians did to the Donald Cook. Let's see, because when it comes to electromagnetic frequencies, 2.4 gigahertz it causes disruption of electrical circuits via electromagnetic induction and electrostatic coupling or conduction. And such a disturbance can degrade or stop circuits from functioning entirely. So they're using way more powerful millimeter wave generated electromagnetic fields and beams on their electronic warfare systems than 2.4 gigahertz. There's all kinds of frequencies. There's a broad array of electromagnetic frequencies. And guess what? Faraday cages can't stop them. They're not foolproof. Faraday cages can help from things like lightning strikes, like sudden pulses, but a slow, gradual field, it cannot stop it. It can't stop it. Who the F is Chad Carr? Who are you? Cat Z400? I don't know. But you better behave yourself in here, man. I don't tolerate trolling. Anyway, yeah, so basically, all that stuff I told you about China, from their middle class to their billionaires to their industrial and manufacturing might, to their military industrial complex as part of that, to their shipbuilding, which is insane, but you can lump that in with their industrial capacity. You know, basically, China is this behemoth. They have the third biggest nuke arsenal on Earth, but it doesn't have to be the biggest. They don't have to overkill. They just have to have enough nukes to do the job to still be the world's superpower. They have, realistically, 1,000 nukes because of the fissile material that China has had for the past 25 to 30 years. China has had 22 tons of weapons-grade uranium and 2 to 4 tons of plutonium, which is enough to make 1,200 nukes, but realistically, it's about 1,000. I don't go with the lowball estimates. I go with the high median estimate because their nuke numbers are a state secret, but you can easily ascertain the numbers by 1, finding out how much fissile material they possess, 2, looking at how many missile silos they've built recently out in Xinjiang and Inner Mongolia that go with what they've had in Manchuria, plus their road and rail mobile missiles. So, and then the third thing is you multiply the number of warheads that each ICBM carries, and you get the number of about 1,000. China has about 1,000 nukes, which is enough to destroy 2 large nations, the size of Russia or the United States. Russia because of how it concentrates its populations in certain parts of its country, and the United States because 500 nukes hitting a country like us would just destroy everything, you know? Because even 300 nukes hitting us would be enough to basically knock us back to the Stone Age, you know? So basically, and China, yes, China's the leader in AI. China's the leader in AI. There is nothing really, to me, more horrifying than an artificial intelligence, plus they're the leader in robotics too, than an artificial intelligence coupled with robotics to create a communist, a CCP loyal artificial intelligence, a sentient CCP loyal AI that does the bidding of the Chinese Communist Party. Because you have to understand, AI is created by coding and coders. What you input in is what you get out. So these Chinese Communist Party coders that create these communist AIs are creating AI that is fanatically loyal to the CCP regime. And when they pair it with their robotics, you've seen the Atlas and dog robots? Well, guess what? China has robots that are light years ahead of that. They have android-like robots. I've seen video of it. Japan has them too. So does South Korea. Asia, while Europe has robots, Russia has robots, Germany, France are robotic producing nations, even we do. The Asian robots are light years ahead of what we have. Now you pair AI to that, and you have a nightmare scenario. Even in my audio book, I've mentioned the drones' use in combat as well as robots, but I'm about to focus more on that in the last two parts. But can you take a second to imagine an artificial intelligence that is fanatically loyal to Xi Jinping and the CCP let loose on our streets to hunt us down, run us down like dogs? I believe that's going to happen. And that's why I put it in my audiobook, especially more towards the end. Because while in World War III I see robots, I still see human beings as the soldiers taking the center stage, but robots will become more common in war. They will. Because you're going to see that in World War III. When we get invaded by China and Russia, you will see the use of their robots. They'll have special elements of their military that are like how they have special warfare drone controllers. They're going to have special warfare robotics units that maintain and maybe passively control the robots. There might be a combo of AI and analog, where they can have manual controllers of it, where they can alternate. You're going to see that. It'll be experimental in World War III, but you'll see it. They will. They'll let loose these CCP robots to hunt people down, especially when the occupation sets in, and they're in a high rapid sort of pace trying to colonize this land. And they're going to want to rid it of all the Americans that are left. So they might send these robots out on partisan hunting operations, counterinsurgency operations to hunt partisans. Yeah, unorthodox, but that's not... China doesn't get its lickings until the very end when Yeshua returns, because it's written in the Word that the kings of the East cross the Euphrates when it dries up to come to Armageddon. We're stuck with China until the end of time when Yeshua comes back. China's the most powerful nation on the face of the earth, bar none, no competitors, and we're stuck with them until the end of time. That is why I warn about them, because everybody else is worried about other BS nonsense, and they don't see the real danger posed by that country. That country has its own elites with their own agendas. And they're going to act on those agendas, and they're going to crush the West, along with their allies. There's going to be 10 Eastern kings who are victorious after World War III. Those are going to be your kings that all give their power unto the beast and reign together with him for 1 hour, Bible time like it says, 1 hour, which isn't very long, we're talking maybe months or so, before it all falls apart again, and then the wrath of God comes down, and there's infighting. So... all right, Welder Princess. Well, you have a blessed day. Thank you for coming. But you see, China is the biggest threat. They're more of a threat than basically these Western elites could ever be. Yeah, sure, they're a thorn in everybody's side for now, but they're not going to be the winners. They don't get to run the NWO. They're not going to have their New World Order. It'll be a Sino-Russian New World Order. It's nobody's destroyed anything of China's. It's quite impossible. China is going to be the one that destroys all the rest of the countries. They're the Red Dragon, and they have all the power right now. So, the 200 million man army, that's definitely going to be a Chinese army, for sure. And it's going to lay waste to a lot of people. Because there's two layers to that whole 200 million man army thing. You've got the spiritual, but then you've also got the physical as well. The layers of it. So when I say layers, I'm talking about, of course, your physical dimension and your spiritual dimension. There's different layers in prophecy. You know, they apply to different things. So, there's May. So you got different things going on in the spiritual and the physical. And China is the only nation, due to its industrial base and its population, that can raise a 200 million man army. It'll take some time to do it, but according to Bible prophecy, they're the only ones that can do that. So now, like I said at the beginning of the video, I sort of got off track. I wanted to discuss all the different dynamics that went into making the civil conflict what it was, like in my hypothetical, and why I made it that way. You see, when I was doing my research, I researched social issues in this country. I researched the different types of complaints and gripes people would have in accordance with the social issues, too, and in accordance with the regime and its policies and its overreach, the economic troubles, the regional issues and types of factions you would have according to religions like your cults and your kooks. Of course, your ultra-nationalists, which are very real and could easily morph into secular humanists like the NSRF did. You have regular traditional conservatives, you've got libertarians, you've got a little bit of everybody. And when the resources dwindle and the overreach gets to be too much and the social issues explode out of control, there's not going to be any one singular issue that starts the civil conflict. It's not going to be caused by anybody's assassination or whatever. No, it's going to be a bunch of things coming together like a stew. Like if you're cooking stew, it's going to be a CW stew. A CW stew. Like you're cooking and you're putting different ingredients in it. It's not going to be any one singular issue, because no war is ever caused by one single thing. Wars are caused by a plethora of different things that hit a nexus point. They all come together to create this conflict, whatever conflict it is. That's how it's been for every war throughout history. There was more to World War I than just Archduke Franz Ferdinand. He wasn't the sole reason why World War I began. There were all kinds of underlying reasons. So when there's an internal conflict in the United States, it's not going to be for any one thing. No, you have to think deeper. You got to think deeper. It's going to be all kinds of things. Social issues, different factions that are along factional lines. Sure, there might be elements of ethnic strife or whatever, racial crap, but a lot of that's fomented by the regime. But you would have those types of operations going on, like by the CIA and whoever else. But you would have these different factions that have been plotting and lurking in the shadows for many, many, many years. This is a nation of 340 million people almost. This is the third most populated country on the face of the earth. If you don't think that there's factions out there, leadership corps, plotting and lurking in the shadows, then you're horribly naive and you're misguided. Because there damn sure are. There are people out there who have their own agendas, that want their own goals to be met, that are going to fully take advantage of any type of civil strife or rioting or whatever. Like in Syria, when the Syrian civil conflict began, they had what was called a Day of Rage, which was when the Assad regime had to deal with a whole bunch of people basically rioting against his regime. And then what happened very shortly after that was that these factions took full advantage of that, and they emerged out from behind the shadows. And you know what they did? They started fighting with weapons against the Assad regime. Different factions. There were dozens of factions in the Syrian civil conflict. Now, in my scenario, I only had about 10 factions. Really, if you wanted to count the neutral areas, that would be 11. But there were really only 10 factions, because that's all the color coding that was all the colors I had for the color coding, because I had to color code it. I had to give each faction a color, to represent it. But
in a actual occurrence, you can best believe there would probably be more than just 10. But I did it to articulate the concepts, to show people the concepts. And these are very real concepts based on very detailed research into the social issues, into the different types of ideologies that exist in this country, and would easily, create their own factions, of course. About the resources, which I added that into my docu series, and also much, much more. Because there's a lot more to these things. Like, the woke militias. I put that in my documentary before the first woke militias even showed their face in public. Yes, I did. I'm not a prophet. I'm not a watchman. I'm not none of that. I just do damn good research. So I put woke militias in my docuseries before the first Antifa woke militia with standardized gear and unit patches and standardized equipment showed up on the scene. A real woke militia that showed up to protect a rainbow event. That's real. That happened after I made my documentary. They made a debut like that. You know what else? I put in there the ultra nationalists. It's like the MAGA people, but to like the 10th power, maybe 20th power. Like they go like out in left field with it. Like they totally take it in a warped radical direction. Because there are people like that out there. Absolutely there are. There's also anarchists. There's libertarians that want to, do their own thing. You've got traditional conservatives that just want to be left alone and live by their conservative values. You've got all kinds of different factions. You've got cults. Like the Mormon state was a cult. Radical cults that live on compounds. Absolutely they exist. If you don't think they exist, then you're out of your mind. Of course there's cults. And of course there's cults that live on compounds that have their own private armies and militias and leadership corps. Like Supreme Acolyte Josiah, Grand Acolyte Mordecai, Acolyte Issachar, and all the other acolytes that were on that compound represented the radical, fanatical, religious kooks, the cults. Whereas the NSRF was like your ultra-nationalist faction that took it to a warped, crazy, radical direction and became secular humanists, meaning they wanted the nation state to be a god unto itself. Their slogan was, "We build a god out of blood from the ground up," meaning they wanted to slaughter anyone who didn't fit into their new idea of America and build a new America off their bodies, off the dead. That was the NSRF slogan, because they truly believed in that. They wanted to build a new state, a new version of America. They wanted to make it a god out of blood, out of a civil conflict. So they were very brutal too. Them and the Mormon state, when they had their battle over the nukes in Cheyenne, Wyoming, that was the biggest battle in the whole civil conflict. It was like a rock. Well, no, what was that expression? It was like a, between a rock and a hard place. No, it was like a, no, I'm sorry. It was an immovable force, or an immovable object meets an unstoppable force. That was what the battle there was like. Because you had the two most radical factions on the whole map. One was secular humanist, and the other was ultra freakish religious, like this cult. And they were fighting each other, continually throwing more and more troops into the meat grinder to fight over those WMDs. Because all the factions were fighting over America's weapons of mass destruction, be they chemical weapons or be they nukes. In a civil conflict, you have to consider those types of things. You have to understand that if America falls apart, you're going to have madmen running for the weapons of mass destruction. You absolutely will. You will see that. Chemical weapons, chemical artillery shells, like sarin and VX shells. They're sure out there. They're sure in those chemical weapons depots like Pueblo, Colorado, like Deseret, Utah, like where's the other one? Anniston, Maryland, Bluegrass, Kentucky. There's absolutely chemical weapons shells. They've been put in long-term storage. When the madmen get a hold of those things will be able to do just like they did in that scenario. They'll slaughter hundreds of thousands of people. Chemical weapons are a nasty, ugly WMD. But nukes are too, of course. And the Mormon state had foreign fighters coming, like they did in Syria, coming to join, to get battle experience in the civil conflict so that when they went back to their home countries, they could start their own little groups. Well, yes, VX is extremely nasty, Ken. It's a disgusting way to die. Saddam Hussein used VX to gas hundreds of thousands of Iranians, which brought them to the peace table in the Iran-Iraq war, because Saddam gassed about a fifth of the whole Iranian army in a few days' time. So, yeah, VX is a nasty WMD, a nasty chemical weapon. So is sarin, too. Sarin's pretty nasty. But there's a lot of VX and sarin in those storage depots. So in my scenario, those different factions get a hold of those things. And they start slaughtering lots of innocent people that got caught in the crossfire. Like in the Battle of Chicago, when they gassed 300,000 people and the NSRF was trying to clear out the Midwest of regime elements. They captured woke Chicago, because Chicago was a regime island in the middle of the NSRF territory, so the NSRF wanted to capture it, because the NSRF hated the regime and all it stood for. So do all the other factions. Everybody hated the regime in that scenario. And, the regime had the most enemies, I think, out of all the different factions. They were all fighting each other, but I'm saying they all hated the regime equally. So when the NSRF was fighting the regime in that big battle, it was a big battle, Battle of Chicago, they gassed about 300,000 civilians, along with a few, about, 15 or 20,000 of the regime fighting forces that were there, that were left after the, conventional battle took place. They gassed most of the rest of them with VX, and they eliminated hundreds of thousands of civilians with it. I made that scenario as realistic as possible so that people could understand the sheer ramifications of what such a thing would be like. You'd have all these psychos going for WMDs. You had the Mormon state with all these technical experts all under one roof in the Tully Army Depot in Utah that were loyal to Mormonism in the Mormon state after Supreme Acolyte Josiah took control and hijacked the Mormon church, the mainstream church, and converted it to his brand of Mormonism, his cult brand. Well, they all swore loyalty to him, because he convinced them through his sermons and religious just kookery to join his side. So he basically took over the whole Mormon church. A church coup could really happen like that, where you could have a cult, like a fringe group, taking over a mainstream group, like a parasite, and hijacking it to their own ends. Well, when it took it over and had Tully Army Depot, you had robotics experts because they work on the EOD robots. You had basically munitions experts who test or decommission munitions, because they test munitions, they store them, or they decommission them there, and they hit a jackpot of different munitions. That's why the Mormon state had so many, kabooms that they could load up their 18-wheelers with and drive, self-destructing trucks into their enemies, They had all these munitions they could do it with, That's why they were such a dangerous faction, Like the NSRF, they would fly like a cargo plane and use barrel munitions, like, they call them barrel bombs, but those things are nasty too. But the Mormon state retaliated in that battle by driving 18-wheeler, self-destructive trucks into their lines and just boom, just blew huge craters in the ground. You have to think about stuff like that. That kind of stuff would be rampant. It would be everywhere in a second American Syrian style conflict. This place would be insane. This place would be off the rails, because you would absolutely have the worst of the worst coming out. You'd have about 1 billion, or not 1 billion, but you'd have a lot of like Ted Kaczynskis, you'd have a lot of McVeighs, you'd have all kinds of people doing all kinds of damage. This place would be just a mess in a second American Syrian style conflict, like in my hypothetical scenario, this place would be a wreck. You have to really think about that type of stuff. That stuff would happen. Not only that, but there'd be so many different factions, all with their own ideologies, all fighting over territory. You have to consider stuff like that. That type of stuff, this place would be a madhouse. It wouldn't even be safe, to probably walk outside of your home. It'd be sort of like Sarajevo in Bosnia, where people would walk out of their home and the snipers up on the hills right outside the city, there's snipe civilians just walking out of their houses. I mean, you have to think about stuff like that. This place would be dangerous. You cannot have a realistic expectation of safety anymore when something like that begins. You can no longer have a realistic expectation of safety. All that's out the window. That's gone. Because you're going to have people losing their damn minds. There's not going to be any sense of order in this country. Who's going to make the rules? He who has the firearms is going to be he who makes the rules. So whatever factional area that you live in, you're either going to want to avoid those people or something, because they're going to be the ones that make the rules. Like in the NSRF territory, the NSRF went around with their death squads. They had roving death squads that became their paramilitary, which was like their parallel military, in addition to their regular militias and corps units that defected from the army and whatnot, or veterans, amalgamated together. They had their parallel military structure, which was their Jolly Roger Death Brigades, which were like roving death squads that went around, and they were also like their breakthrough troops that they just threw at enemy lines like fanatically. They would just charge into the enemy lines to break through them. But they also were used as roving death squads. And they also maintained the NSRF prison system, where they brutally tortured and murdered tens of thousands of people, because they took over the old regular prisons, the old penal facilities, and then they used it for their own. They made starvation cells because one of the leaders of the Troika was really sick in the head, like Doik. Doik was the math professor in the Khmer Rouge who basically starved people in S-21. He ran the prison system in Cambodia, where they starved their prisoners and barely gave them anything to eat, because Doik, the former math professor, was always thinking in terms of numbers. He's seen people as numbers, which meant that their food intake was just another number he had to calculate. And he felt that the food would be better served to be given to the soldiers instead of the prisoners. So that was the thinking. I modeled that one leader, because there were three leaders over the NSRF. It was called a troika, meaning three leaders. You had the Colonel McGregor. You had Alfred Motufu, the propaganda and head of the paramilitary, the death squads. And then you had Professor Albertson, who was the guy that was in charge of the prison system of the NSRF. And he starved the prisoners. He starved them until their stomachs blew up from bloating and everything. I mean, he tortured and murdered people in the former prisons when they took it over. You would absolutely have things like that happening in a second American-Syrian-style conflict. They also chopped off people's arms and cauterized it so they didn't bleed out, as a testament to their brutality. And then the Mormon state was also brutal, and they had public executions in the Salt Palace, where they beheaded people who didn't convert to their Mormonism. So, to their brand of it, I should say, to their cult brand of it. They also threw people off of buildings, and their foreign volunteers that came in from other countries with big Mormon populations like Brazil, Mexico, Philippines, etc. Some of them were cannibals. So, that type of thing happened in Syria too, which is why I put that in my documentary. Yeah, sociology was a fun class, Wild Animus. I took sociology in college, yeah. I found it interesting. I also took psychology, too. I took both sociology and psychology. Yeah, I was going for a business degree. I basically only have like an associate's, but, I took a lot of different courses to get my credits to get that, different colleges, too. So, I just amalgamated my credits. But anyway, yeah, sociology is a big part of basically psychology is too. When you're studying war and what goes into it, and you're doing it from deeper than just a surface level, which is what I do. My research is much deeper than surface level research. I dig deep. I look at historical references. I look at social references. There's your sociology and your groups, your group thinking. I look at all of that. Ideologies, history, the different economic factors, socioeconomic factors, the financial issues, all of it. All these different things come into play, and new systems would come out of it that would accompany the different factions. That's very real. That's absolutely what would happen. You're absolutely going to have that. Yeah, everybody has a business degree. It's like, it's just one of those things. It's like a dime a dozen, for people that have business degrees. I don't even know why I bothered, but college is pretty much worthless anyway altogether, because college degrees nowadays are basically a dime a dozen. It doesn't matter what field it is, College just doesn't get you ahead anymore. It's just pointless. What will get you ahead nowadays is a trade, you know. Send your kids to trade school. Send them to trade school, like welding or, actual hands-on type of trades, plumbing. All these things can make them money because you have a lot of people that don't know how to do anything anymore, because they went to college. So learning trades is actually what will make you money and get you ahead, So if you have youngsters, send them to trade school, I have a son, and if there's any if there's any way I can influence him, I'll try and get him, into a trade when he gets old enough. So, but otherwise, back to this. In a civil conflict, basically what's going to happen is that whatever factional area you're in, you're going to have to understand, you're going to have to get in the minds of the people who have the most influence in the area that you're in a Second American Syrian style, multifactional conflict, meaning there's going to be different factions in different areas. Some of them might be more benevolent than others. Some of them might be outright evil. They might be outright evil and radical, like the Mormon state or the NSRF was, or the La Raza narco state, who just willy-nilly, machine gunned innocent people. That there were a criminal enterprise that took over territory so that they could manufacture their, products and sell them, and also weapons. They sold weapons too. So anyway, you have to understand the psychology behind the people that would have the most influence in whatever territory you end up in. They might be benevolent and harmless, like the Union of Southwest Militias or the Maine Militia was. They were pretty benevolent. They weren't trying to, harm innocent people. In fact, they were trying to help the people by keeping out evil factions from their territory. For the Maine Militia, they were fighting just the regime. And for the Union of Southwest Militias, they were fighting the regime, the Free American Army. They were fighting the Mormon state, there was the three main factions they fought. So basically, again, you're going to need to understand the mentality of the people that hold sway over whatever area you end up in, and you're going to want to avoid them at all costs, unless they're benevolent. But, you're also going to have to understand whatever financial or bartering systems, because there's going to be, socioeconomic factors depending on what area you're in, because in more poor areas, you're going to have a lot of barter, because the people aren't going to have, maybe not have precious metals. You might have other areas where precious metals are, traded for goods. Goods and resources will become sparse. So things will have higher value than what they may have ordinarily had, because you're not going to have a lot of production anymore. You're definitely not going to have a lot of trade anymore, because when you have a multi-faction conflict, trade across areas will be exceedingly dangerous and difficult. It'd be like trying to do a caravan of camels across Africa with all the wars that go on in Africa. You might get slaughtered at a border post somewhere, whatever. It's dangerous, It would be the same thing here. This would be the most dangerous country on the face of the earth when we erupt into a Syrian-style civil conflict, multiple factions all duking it out. So, yeah, it's absolutely going to happen. It will happen. Hey, Brogan, good to see you. Yeah, it's absolutely going to happen. there will be such a thing, because the reason for it is, like I've mentioned in my research, all the socioeconomic factors, all the basic social issues in general, the collapse, because when you have a collapse of money and people's ways of living, and everything that people are accustomed to is just gone, poof, out of there. You have overreach to the point to where people are sick of it. You have all of these things just all running together in tandem to make a day of rage like what happened in Syria. And multiple factions that have been lurking in the shadows forever are going to emerge, just like they did in the documentary, and they're going to make their own armies, and it'll be a free-for-all. It's absolutely going to happen like that, and everybody better be ready for it. Even the Bible says it's going to happen like that, because you know what the Bible says in Jeremiah? Before we even get invaded, it says that violence or conflict, of course, depending on translation, violence or conflict will erupt between various leaders, plural, leaders, like faction leaders, plural, leaders. Violence or conflict will erupt between various leaders, faction leaders. There's your multi-way Syrian-style civil conflict. You're going to have to be mindful of everything when that occurs, because everywhere is going to be potentially dangerous, especially when you have nut jobs getting a hold of WMDs, and not even just WMDs, but they'll be raiding all kinds of other depots for conventional type of weaponry. It'll just be a madhouse. Guard armories will be raided. I mean, you have all kinds of stuff like that going on, and people are just going to run roughshod over wherever they want. You're going to have cities, major cities, where you'll have different factions fighting over one city. Just like I showed in the Macon battle in Macon, Georgia, where you had a three-way battle. Also in Vegas, in the Las Vegas battles, I had two separate battles. There was the first battle of Las Vegas, and there was the second battle of Las Vegas, where you had 4 factions all fighting each other over Vegas. 4. Of course, you also had 3 factions fighting over I-5 in southern Oregon and northern California. That was when the regime was up against the combined forces of the 2 allies, which were the Union of Southwest Militias, allied with the Northwest Conservative Army, who both attacked the regime to seize I-5 to cut the regime in half from north to south in the western states, which were regime areas because they're woke loyalist areas, of course, like much of the Northeast is too. But the regime lost a lot of territory really fast. They're not that powerful. They don't have big enough forces to occupy this whole country. It's simple mathematics. If you take all the forces they have, 2.2 million, and not even all of them are here. About 300,000 of that's overseas too. So really, if it's like 1.9 million and you space it out, 1 man per square mile, you wouldn't even fill up half the entire map of the United States with 1 person per square mile. And each person would be outnumbered in each and every square mile. Think about it. All the people that live in this country. So that's not enough personnel to occupy America. So all they can do, including when the military breaks apart and fractures, like it did in my documentary, and goes in all these different directions and joins different factions and even starts their own, like the Free American Army, which I modeled off of the Free Syrian Army, when part of the Syrian army broke away from Assad's regime and made its own faction to fight Assad and the other factions, the Free Syrian Army. Well, the Free American Army would be a faction. Then you'd have other parts of the army going to other factions and bringing everything they had with them. Then what you'd have left of the regime would be like more of your active duty forces that were woke already and indoctrinated in all the woke stuff and rainbow stuff. You would have them left, which wouldn't be that many people. In my scenario, what they had was they had the alphabet paramilitary forces, which all joined together into one single agency, which is called the National Security Forces. That will happen too. You will see that. There will come a day where all the different alphabet forces will all amalgamate. They'll all merge into a single entity. That absolutely will happen one day. just like I showed it in my docuseries. That absolutely will happen. Mark my words. They will do it to simplify all their paperwork and everything else. They're going to amalgamate all these different agencies into one agency. So you had about 300,000 paramilitary for the regime, the National Security Forces. Then you had about 400,000, it was 400,000 regular troops. So that's 700,000. And then you had another 200,000 woke militias. And remember, woke militias are a real thing. And I incorporated woke militias into my documentary before they ever made their debut in real life. Guess what else I showed in my documentary before it happened in real life? The drug war in Mexico that forced the cartels across our border. I showed that in my documentary before it erupted. I've got eyewitnesses too. Ken, you remember when I contacted you about that? I said, Ken, I put that in my documentary. Look, it's happening. You remember. So, like I said, I'm not a prophet or anything like that. I just do damn good research. I also showed people the 260,000 troops, American troops, that they were threatening to boot out for not taking the mark. And then that number grew to 500,000. Bam! There's your Free American Army faction, or other factions, because those guys would be the ones that would, say shove it, and they would go their own way. All these things were in my documentary. The Free American Army, when they had their meeting, the leadership of that faction, the junta, they had a military junta, which is a group of commanders, generals, typically, sometimes admirals too. They had a military junta, which was their leadership corps for the Free American Army. And one of the big things that made them create their own faction was the mandates, and also the woke stuff, and that. So they went their own way. They made the Free American Army. And other parts of the army broke off and splintered and joined other factions too. So all these things I've studied have all come to fruition or are coming to fruition. And they're all happening around the same time. Even Texas is doing more of its own thing these days. You see it all the time. So Texas was its own faction in my docuseries. So was Florida. Florida, their leadership had a change of heart. They realized that they wanted to be on the right side of history, so they turned on the regime. They were part of it, but then they turned on it because they realized that if their so-called plans would have come to fruition, they would have been kicked to the curb, and they didn't want that, so they decided at the last minute to turn. There's a lot of signs that show that there's things going on behind the scenes. There's definitely cogs turning behind the scenes to where you're going to see people slip away and do their own things. They can make all the plans they want. I'm talking about these Western elites. They can make all the plans they want. But that doesn't mean that they're going to come to pass. And not only that, they can't control what everybody does. This is a country of 340 million almost people. Almost 340 million people. I just rounded up because of all the border crossers that have come into this country. It's about 340 by now. So, within our borders. So, in a country this big with this many people, there's all kinds of people in the shadows plotting and scheming and doing their own things. They have their own agendas. And it's naive and foolish to think that that's not happening. So, you're going to have all these factions coming out of the woodwork with their own armies, their own agendas, their own ideologies. And you're going to have a multi-way Syrian-style civil conflict. Absolutely 100%. That docu-series I made was so detailed, so in-depth, and showed so many concepts of how and why and what and where such a thing would be, and how it would look, and why it would look like that, and how it would move. I showed everything from special operations missions even, to the foreign intervention by the shipping of weapons to further destabilize our country. I showed all the different factions, their ideologies, even their leaders. I showed their leaders. I had character development in that. I showed leadership cores, the characters themselves and what they stood for, what they did. I read the first part as a story to introduce it, the origins of the different factions, how they came to be. The second video, half of that was a continuation of the story portion. Then I went into the battle maps. And then it got more visual. And then I showed the foreign intervention. I showed the atrocities, the leaders and what they stood for. I showed pictures of them. I drew them. I mean, just so people could have visuals of these people, what they looked like, what they stood for, what they believed in, what the economies were like, the financial and bartering systems were like in each faction's area that they controlled. I showed how the Great Reset was a flop. I showed how the digital currency failed because some areas had no electricity and couldn't even use it. I showed all this. I showed that it was worthless. It was as worthless as the paper dollar became because there's nothing backing it. America's broke. It's busted. It's out. It doesn't matter if you make a digital currency. It's not going to do anything. It's not going to make a difference. You can't just ascribe a value arbitrarily to something, have nothing backing it. Psst. Come on now. But I put that in the docu-series. So I showed that was a big flop because America was busted. It was out of there. It was done. It was in full collapse, full civil conflict. It was erupting. And there was no way that people could use the digital money. So that was a big flop. Big time. So I showed the foreign intervention in the guise of the the weapons shipping and how that further destabilized the country because you had factions like the La Raza narco state and the NSRF obtaining these weapons. And the NSRF used the foreign weapons to equip its new paramilitary Jolly Roger Death Brigades, which were the roving death squads that turned into paramilitary shock troops that would break through the enemy lines in battles. And they also ran the torture camps that were the former prisons, like the state prisons that they took over, or the federal places. The NSRF was evil. And so I mean, they took everything to a warped, radical level with their secular humanism. They were all about cleansing. By cleansing, I mean wiping out the opposition completely. They hated wokesters. They hated uber rich. They hated everything that was against their version of America. They even hated religious kooks like the Mormon state. But they came to a fragile peace with the Mormon state because, like I said earlier, it was like an immovable object meets an unstoppable force. You had the two most radical factions just throwing troops at each other and grinding each other down to a standstill. So they agreed to have a temporary peace treaty so they could vanquish their other enemies first and have a final showdown later, which the Mormon state steadily built up its weapons, like all the chemical weapons it got from Deseret and Pueblo. It built all those up in Cheyenne in anticipation for the future battle with the apocalyptic final showdown with the NSRF that never came because the Chinese invaded by the end of the documentary. But before that, it was a really wild and crazy civil conflict with all kinds of dynamics. I showed the mental deterioration of Supreme Acolyte Josiah, how he would lock himself in the Holy of Holies in the Salt Lake Temple, and he moved his family in there, his 10 wives and himself, and he went insane and started making edicts, like random edicts. He would come out, and sometimes it would just be poetry, like he was losing his mind. And he claimed he was communicating with God, and I really put a lot of detail into the leadership characters, but also I showed the atrocity dynamic. I showed the battle maps and the tactics. See, I showed the logistical aspect because without the logistics, they couldn't have had the big battles because otherwise it would have just been a big low intensity war. But there were aspects of high intensity warfare when they had the logistics. And they could accumulate the personnel in one area, like whole units, to have big set-piece battles. That was the battles I showed was the high-intensity battles. The rest of the conflict was just a series of low-intensity warfare where it was just sporadic firefights and maybe a couple exchanges of artillery, or maybe a very, very rare occasional airstrike because they were very low on fuel and couldn't use a lot of aircraft often. Or they had traps and mines and things like that, patrols, ambushes. That's low intensity warfare. But then the high intensity is when you have whole units fighting on a battlefield. So there were instances of both, and a lot of people died. There were 15 million deaths in that conflict, and 7 million were from the combatants themselves. So it was a brutal war even before we got invaded, which was much, much bigger in scope and scale and ended a lot more people. If you watch my invasion work, even though it's on a separate timeline than the civil conflict, the same exact thing as all my invasion work would have happened right after the civil conflict. So you take the civil conflict documentary, and then you add all the invasion work I did to that, and then you've got basically the same thing. It's the same outcome. Actually, it's a worse outcome because we're already extremely weak when we get invaded, and there wouldn't really be that many uprisings because all the best people in America would have butchered each other in the civil conflict. So China can just get immediately to work on strip mining the country and enslaving the rest of the people because nobody will be there to fight back. They won't have to worry about fighting a big counterinsurgency. China and Russia are austere-minded people. They don't want to have to expend money and resources and personnel and anything else if they know they don't have to. So what better than to let America rip itself apart for them, so when they come in and smash this place like an iron fist militarily, when they occupy it, they don't have to fight a big counterinsurgency campaign. They can just get right to colonizing it and strip mining it by bringing in their civilian workforces and enslaving the Americans and having them do the manual labor, and their colonists can strip mine everything and take what they want and send it back to China. Grow all the food so China can be food independent. That's a huge goal of China's. Huge goal. That's why they want the lower 48. They already control basically Canada. And, the Russians, of course, are going to get the Arctic. They're going to get northern 3 Canadian territories. They're going to get Alaska back. And Russia ruling the whole Arctic will have so many resources. They're innumerable. I mean, already Russia is a $5 trillion economy. In real terms, they're a $5 trillion economy sitting on $75 trillion worth in US dollars of resources in Russia. Natural resources. 75 trillion. You know how many China has? China's a big country. They have a lot of resources, but they only have like 35 trillion worth of resources. Russia has 75 trillion. China has 35 trillion worth of natural resources. We have almost 50 trillion. So China wants to take us over so they can add to what they've got. Strip mine us. Farm us for their food supplies. So they can be food independent. That's their chief objective. But they also want the human resources of slavery, slave labor, in Laogai, make products and mine and construction work, whatever they want, whatever they need. They're going to use slave labor. So basically, after they become food independent and they get the resources to boot, whatever resources are in the lower 48, China is just, they're going to continue on the up and up. They're going to grow so big, they're going to grow to be too big for their pants, proverbially speaking. In Russia, with owning the Arctic, you add this 75 trillion of resources that are already in Russia, inside Russian territory right now, to whatever else they get from Alaska and the northern Canadian territories, Nunavut, Yukon, and Northwest territories. They're going to have the whole entire Arctic Sea, too. All the oil, natural gas, mineral wealth that is under that Arctic Ocean. All of that will be Russian. Russia will be the wealthiest, or at least in the top 2 wealthiest nations on Earth. And China will definitely be up there too. They won't ever have to rely on anybody else for food again once they take us over and take over all our arable farmland and start irrigating it and growing crops again. So that's the objectives. China and Russia already have their plans for North America. They already have their plans for North America. So basically, China and Russia are going to split North America to where Russia gets the northern parts and China gets the lower part of Canada as a rump puppet state, and the lower 48 as a colony, as a colonial possession. Their elites who control their currencies are within their regimes. In fact, Russian bank laws are such that the Russian central bank must annually give half of all its profits, to the Russian regime. You would never see that in the West. You would never see anything like that in the United States. You know why? Because the central banks here are the opposite. They run the regimes in the West, and they loan out money at an exorbitant rate that the taxpayer has to pick up the tab for to pay the interest that can't even be paid. So in the West, you have these banksters, these satanic banking elites running the West for now, but they've run it into the ground, which is going to make it easy for the elites of the East, of China and Russia, and their allies to come over here and take us over and destroy the West for good. The West is their rivals. They're not in bed together. They've done business together, but don't misunderstand. That doesn't mean that they're on the same page. Of course not. That's a naive thing to think, that just because somebody does business, they like them. No, they don't give a damn about them. No. China and Russia hate the Western elites and view them as rivals. But they're probably laughing their asses off at the Western elites, destroying their own power base to make it easier for them to come in and take over. Yeah. And they're watching us. They're watching us, keenly observing, watching us rip ourselves apart, watching us collapse. They're laughing their asses off. They can't wait to take us over. But they know that this place has a little bit more ripping apart to go, like a full-on Soviet Union-style collapse followed by a civil conflict. And China is going to help make that happen faster, because China's already playing a big role in pushing us in that direction towards collapse. When China pulls out the last pillar holding up our economy, which is the petrodollar, by swaying Saudi to do their bidding and do the petro-yuan, China will get all the same benefits we used to have with the petrodollar, but it'll be for the yuan renminbi. Yes, China will reap the rewards and will collapse. That's the only thing holding us up. We have a totally artificial economy now. We lost the backbone of our economy back in 2020. Do you all realize that the small business used to be the biggest part of the American economy? Small business was the backbone of the American economy. When we transitioned from an industrial economy to more of a service economy and a business economy, small business became the backbone of our economy. When they did the shutdowns and small businesses couldn't afford to operate, we lost 1/3 of our GDP and 1/3 of the small businesses with it and 1/3 of the economy with it. You know, way to go. Way to go. Way to go, regime and D to the C, way to go. So now, as I've reported before, I reported that when it happened. That was from the Federal Reserve's own numbers out of their own mouth. When I reported again from the AEI.org and whatever other sites I was reading at the time, I can't remember, I said it in the other live, but I reported that it was in fact half. I was right about that because I had said that before many times, and I found sources that corroborated that, you know, a bunch of them. So we have lost half our economy. So we're down to a $12 trillion economy from what we'd once been. We used to be about double that, but it's all artificial because they also count credit, usury, and debt, like credit card swipes even, as part of the GDP in the West. That's what they count. So they have a bunch of fake statistics propping up a fake economy with fake everything, and usury and debt, you know, funny money, you know, monopoly money, you know, that's backed up by almost nothing, you know, but this petrodollar scheme, you know, that's why we've been able to have this lifestyle. When China pulls out the table leg to that, it's all going to fall apart. China's doing a lot of things. They've already infiltrated and subverted a lot of our institutions. They're already doing a lot to push us into the direction that I was just speaking about the aforementioned, insofar as the multifactional internal conflict is concerned. So absolutely, China and Russia, there's outside forces doing what they can to sabotage things and to push us into that direction. Even all the sabotage of some of the food stores, that might not even be all self-inflicted. Some of that might be from foreign sabotage. It very well could be. Just like that ship that burnt. What was that ship? The USS Bonham that burnt? That was sabotage. No way a metal ship just burns like that, I mean, there are so many foreign troops inside our country right now living among us that walk around in civilian clothing if they're walking outside of their CCP properties, like if they get weekend liberty, like I put in my audio book, There's so many foreign troops among us, it's insane. I mean, and also foreign intelligence agents like of the MSS, which is the Chinese Ministry of State Security. That's like their CIA and secret police rolled into one. And then there's the FSB, which is like Russia's version of that, and then, the Ministry of Intelligence in Iran. I mean, there's all kinds of intel agents and saboteurs. Those would be the guys that create and run the proxy groups that they, like cartels and things, and whatever else, they cultivate proxies and run them like handlers, They also are saboteurs and spies. I mean, they're running this country into the ground. There's foreign sources from these Eastern elites causing our downfall, as are self-inflicted. By self-inflicted, I mean from these Western elites, like their subversive elements. So we have it coming from a few different directions. So this stream was a summary of why I've been warning and shouting from the rooftops about everything I've warned about on this channel, because it's that dire and it's that important, because people are going to have to navigate these things here pretty soon. Absolutely. You're going to have to navigate the collapse. Are you ready? Do you have your logistical stores? Do you have caches? Have you cached away your supplies? You better would have. You better would have. Because you don't want to keep everything you have in one location, because if it gets overrun or destroyed, then you're shit out of luck, aren't you? You better have multiple places where you have items cached. You're not going to be able to rely on driving either. What happens if your vehicle breaks down and you have a bunch of crap in your vehicle? You're not going to be able to carry it all with you, are you? No, you're not. You better be thinking about stuff like that. If your area gets overrun by a hostile force, whatever it is, foreign or factional, if it's part of the civil situation, you better have a place where your items are stockpiled safely, that you can live off of them until you can get yourself together. Just like I've shown and depicted in all my invasion work, all the cache sites that they had, so they can move around from site to site. You can never operate far away from your logistical sources. You have to understand that. Logistics are everything in enduring such a situation. You are not going to be able to operate far from your logistical sources. If you don't have your supplies, you will die. That is a fact. So you better be caching away your items. You better have your ammunition, your gear, any extras you might have as far as defense items. You better have some body armor with steel sappy plates if you can carry them or afford them. But if you can't, you can get the ceramics, which are lighter. They're lighter, but they shatter after a certain amount of hits from rifle ammunition. It takes about 4 to 6 hits of an AK or maybe a 5.56 or 7.62, that, intermediate rifle rounds. It takes about 4 to 6 hits to shatter a ceramic sappy plate in the body armor. I have steel plates, so they can just dump mag after mag into that, and I'm pretty much impervious to small arms ammunition, at least where the sappy plate covers my internal organs. But so you better have very high quality protection. High quality protection. You better have something like this, You better have something like that. You better have defense tools, too. You better have defense tools. you better be pro self-defense. You know, self-defense is part of the Bible too. It's all throughout the Bible. There's so many stories about self-defense throughout the Bible. It's a key part of the word. So if you're not about self-defense, then you're not a true follower of Yeshua. You're a pansy. And Yeshua Messiah says that cowards will be cast into the outer darkness with the liars and the dogs and the sorcerers. So men have no excuse when it comes to, you know, self-defense. They better defend themselves and the people they care about. Men have no excuse. If you don't defend yourself and you're a man, or defend those you care about, like your family, then you're a coward, and you will be cast in the outer darkness. Well, MB, it doesn't happen like that if it's within the armor, because look, when you have that hitting the plate in here, those fragments are going to be on this cloth. The fragments are going to be on the cloth and the Kevlar. They're not going to quite fly up and hit your face. That would only happen if you have the plate outside, like if you just wore the plate by itself somehow, you know, and then you had it hitting the plate by itself. Then you'd have, you know, little fragments flying up and hitting you, but that wouldn't happen while it's inside the armor, because you got the actual cloth and Kevlar covering to protect you from that. So, you know, I mean, you got to be thinking about where you're going to cache away your supplies. You better have supply caches hidden away in the woods or wherever, where you only know where they're at, where you can get to them. You know, food, water, medical supplies, especially food and water, but also medical supplies, extra ammunition. You better put all that stuff up, and you better have more than one place. Because like in my stories where they had to move around as nomads to outrun the enemies, you know, just constantly staying on the move, you know, so the enemy had to always, you know, look for them and, you know, try and figure out where they were, try to ascertain their next position. They stayed on the move constantly so they could avoid being slaughtered, you know. You have to have caches. You have to have logistical caches that you can get to. Otherwise, you're in deep shit. You better have supplies. You better have other places besides one central location. And you're not going to be able to use your vehicle in a conflict. You're just not. You're not. I mean, you might get away with it here and there, but it presents itself as an extra large target for enemy aircraft, drones, whatever else, artillery strikes. I mean, you name it, you know. Or if you run into enemy, you know, armor, personnel carriers that have machine gun turrets, I mean, your ass is grass then. You know, so vehicles are pretty much a non-option unless it's like an all-terrain vehicle that you can drive through the woods in or something like that. All-terrain vehicles played a prominent role when it came. MB, I'm telling you, man, that steel's way better. It's the fragments are not going to hit you as long as it's within the actual cloth and the Kevlar. It doesn't work like that. You're pretty well good as long as it's in there. That would only happen, MB, if the plate itself is exposed. Like if it's just the plate outside, then that kind of thing would be an issue. But it's not an issue when it's inside. You know, when it's inside the armor itself, that can't happen because the cloth is there to prevent that. The Kevlar and the cloth, the outer cloth, that stops that type of thing like in its tracks. You know, a lot of different military forces are even switching to steel plates because steel plates are much more effective in terms of protection than ceramics, but they're heavier, but they're definitely worth it. MB, it really doesn't happen like that, man. I'm telling you, like as long as it's in the armor, those fragments are not going to hit you, man. They're not, because that cloth is going to stop it. I'm telling you, man. Like that's how it works. I mean, you would be right if the plate's outside, like exposed, but you don't wear it like that. You slide it up in. It's an insert. It goes in the armor, so that way, you know, the fragments, you know, they're not gonna bounce off. I mean, it's the same concept as the ceramic being in there, you know, because you have this cloth and Kevlar on the outside, and the plate's like behind that, so it's like, you know, it's not going to fly up at you like that. You know, it makes no difference whether you have a ceramic or a steel in at that point. It's the cloth and stuff is still there to prevent that type of thing. But back to the survival stuff. I mean, you basically have to have your arrangements all set up before that type of thing occurs. Like, I go by this metric. You got collapse, you got internal Syrian-style conflict. This is the biblical metric off of Jeremiah. We go off of what the word says, not off of what random, kooky BS comes out. We go off of what the word says. The word says collapse, civil conflict, multifactional, and foreign invasion. So that's what we have to look forward to. That's the metric I go by because it's the most realistic. Because we know what happens to Babylon. That's how it happens. That's the order of operations. That's the order of events. So when the collapse happens, famine is a collapse. We go off to what the word says. It says famine. When you have a famine, you're pretty much in collapse. Okay? You're in collapse. When the famine comes and the collapse, which is your collapse, when you have the big collapse and famine as a resultant from that, that is when you have to make sure that whatever supplies you've put away, you have to make sure you have caches away from your home or central location that you can go to if you have to become nomadic, if your area gets overrun by heavy enemy forces, or if your artillery's coming down, or air raids, or whatever else, and your house gets blasted into about 1 billion pieces. I mean, you had all your stuff in there, then what? You better have caches that are hidden and spread out that you can live off of as a nomad, going from area to area, rotation. You can be a semi-nomad and do it on a rotational basis, like I had in my first story. So you got to think about all these things. These are all real concepts, and people that aren't teaching you about this are depriving you of vital knowledge, because these are things you need to understand. There are going to be more people that fall at the hands of these foreign Chi-Com forces than there will be to anything else. Because when they take over, it's going to be their way or the highway. You're either going to be a slave, or you're going to be wiped out in a genocide. And if not, if you're one of the blessed ones that escapes into the wilderness, like in my stories, like in my audiobook, then, good on you. God bless you. God blessed you enough that you could be one of those people. So, all the stuff I've shown, all the concepts that I've shown, and all the work I've done on this channel was to help you, to educate you, so that you can understand how to navigate these things based off of, seeing what the characters did, what worked, what didn't work, and why. People that aren't teaching you about this stuff, they're not. This stuff is way too important for people to just, disregard and not think about. People should be studying this stuff, because this is stuff that's actually going to help you. You know what? God said, my people perish for a lack of what? A lack of knowledge. My people perish for a lack of knowledge. So you better learn. You better take in everything you can take in, knowledge-wise. You better watch that civil conflict docu-series. It was a hell of a good series, honestly. Even I'm a critic of my own work, but even I think that turned out amazing. Even though it's low budget, it's still a hell of a series as far as it displays these different concepts of how this thing would move and look and why. Sure, when it happens in real life, some of the factions might have different names, but the concepts are still there. You're still going to have different ideologies, like I've shown in the docu-series. They just might have different names, but they'll be the same ideologies, or the same systems of economies, barter, trade. All that stuff I've shown, and the multiple factions all fighting each other, the regime and how it ran its area. I mean, all of these different factors that I've shown in that docu-series are going to play out in real life. And many of them already are. Like I said, Ken is an eyewitness. I've contacted Ken and been like, hey, all this stuff I put in my documentary is happening now. Like the Mexican drug war that's forcing all these narco militants over on our side of the border. That's your La Raza narco state right there. Oh, all the soldiers threatening to be kicked out. There's your Free American Army there. Texas, doing its own thing, taking the border into its own hands and, resisting, edicts coming from D to the C. There's your Texas secessionist republic there. You got Florida sort of kind of vacillating between, being nominally for the regime, but in some ways not. I mean, it's hard to tell with them, but they're flip-flopping. But, I mean, you have all these signs of things that happened in my documentary coming to pass right now, or they already have just a little while ago, and they're still, emerging. These are all nascent concepts that are coming into fruition all around the same time, just like I showed in my documentary. People better watch that and get the concepts in their heads of why and how these things will look like so that they can navigate it, so they can go around it, learn how, and learn what they need to do to navigate it in the first place. How and why, what works, what doesn't work, and why. What you can get away with, what you can't get away with, and why, in terms of survival. All these other survival people, they aren't talking about any of this, I mean, really, they're not. They're not talking about this. I'm not showing you battle tactics and, small unit tactics like in my community tab story reviews, how building clearance tactics work with diagrams, with illustrations and diagrams. They're not teaching you about counter sniper, counter mine operations, like how to deal with minefields and snipers, and how they operate. Who else is teaching you about that? I ain't seen nobody teaching you about counter sniper or counter mines. No, by counter I mean how to navigate these things. I've shown illustrations and examples from stories I wrote, illustrated out in the community tab story review on what that type of stuff looks like and how it works and what types of things happen. Nobody else is showing you this stuff. I'm showing you this stuff because I have knowledge, because I have experience, because I'm a combat veteran of OIF. I'm a pro at small unit tactics. That's all we did when we trained. Besides doing our artillery job as 13 Bravos, besides that, we were always doing infantry training. We were going to the Mount site, which is our, mock-up city where we trained for urban combat, and we did combat training in the field too. I mean, we did all kinds of combat training as infantry-type forces because they got a twofer out of us when it comes to artillery. You get a 2-for-1 because our default MOS is infantry, even though our primary MOS is artillery. If you're combat arms, you get a 2-for-1. I was a twofer. You get artillery out of me and infantry, depending on your needs. So, same with 19 kilos, which are tankers. They can be used like that too. They get the same training. They're combat arms MOS, just like I was, just like even infantry is just infantry, of course, 11 Bravo. But, we did all that stuff. I drew diagrams of it to show people how these things work mechanically. I've shown everybody the mechanics of all these things. Ain't nobody else showing you that. Who else is taking the time to draw up diagrams, illustrations, to show people how these things work? And why am I showing you how it works? So you can navigate it, so you can go around it, so you can avoid it. Showing you how. Showing you how by showing you what these things look like and how they work, mechanically, down to the last details. Even in the stories, I show examples of all kinds of different threats in a different threat environment. Each different threat environment, whether it's urban, whether it's suburban, or whether it's rural. There's different threat environments with different threats. You've got snipers, you got minefields, like I've talked about just a moment ago. That's a threat. You've got basically clearance operations like cordon and search, hammer and anvil, where they surround an area and go up the streets clearing everything in that area. You've got artillery fire missions where they call artillery in on you and blow you to kingdom come. You got airstrikes, all kinds of stuff. Yeah, hand-to-hand combat. I've exactly, Ken. I showed that in my audio book too, because some of the partisans dig in a trench system which is their home. They live in those because they live in earthworks, because so that they won't be seen as easily from recon drones, because they live in a coniferous forest of pines, because it camouflages their IR signature, and they dig in and go underground, and that's how they live. That's how they escape from being seen all the time by Chinese and Russian recon assets, be they the satellites, be they the recon spy planes, be they the drones. That's where they hide. They hide underground. They live in earthen bunkers, primitive bunkers like the Viet Cong in Vietnam, or they live in caves like the Afghans in Afghanistan. You know, they did that in my story, in my audiobook, and all my written stories. I showed all kinds of things. All kinds of things. Showed you exactly how people would need to live to survive. In my community tab story review, I show you field sanitation. The reason I'm talking about all this like this is because I want people to know what is in the work that I've made so that they can go look at it, you know? I might hear something that's very important to them that they want to go and check out, you know, maybe something they don't know about, like field sanitation. That's in my community tab story review. Made a whole video dedicated to that. That's very important. It prevents typhus, dysentery, cholera. There's all kinds of different diseases that can be prevented by simple sanitation measures. I had a whole thing on field sanitation, which is very dire importance. And they don't throw out their trash. They're lazy and they don't throw out their trash. Like if the garbage pickup stops running, you know, they're going to let their trash pile up. Then you're going to have rodents that carry lice that'll give you typhus. So you burn your garbage. That's in my field sanitation thing. I also have the different descriptions on how to get rid of feces properly, you know, in different ways, you know. That's all in there. That's all in there. That community tab story review is worth its weight in gold if it had a weight, but it's just a playlist of vital videos. I start simple and work my way up like building blocks. The first several videos are very simple. They're not complicated topics. They start simple, but then they build up into more advanced topics as they go in the community tab story review playlist. There's all kinds of knowledge in there. Those are gems. Ain't nobody else teaching you nothing like that. There's a lot of gems in that playlist. I hope they stay up too, Wild Animus. Because I already know all this stuff, you know. I'm the one that made the content. I just hope other people take it and save it for themselves. Copy the written stories, you know, if you know how to read them with all my abbreviations and purposely misspelling certain words so that the algos didn't take them down. If you know how to read my stories, you know, just copy them and paste them. You can keep them. I don't care. Just keep it in its original context. That's all I ask, you know. Use it for your benefit. If you want to rip videos, like take the videos and copy the videos themselves, save them, do it. I don't care. Just use it in the original context. Take the whole audiobook and save it. If you have the memory on your computer, I don't care. You know, take anything you want of mine. It's all free. I don't hide this behind a paywall like some of these other jackasses do. You know, it's all free here. All information should be free, especially vital, pertinent information to help save lives. I have not done anything for money on this channel. Not ever have I asked for money. I don't sell no bullshit products. I'm here strictly to help people. I'm as authentic as it gets. I'm genuine. You know, I ain't trying to sell nothing. I ain't asking for no money. I don't give a damn about no money. God already gave me everything I need. Got me a nice house. I make plenty of money. I'm freaking retired, you know. So I use my time to help other people. Because that's what God wanted me to do. So, you know, that's what I'm doing. It felt right in my spirit, so that's what I did. I helped people. I passed my knowledge along to other people, you know. I'm legitimately trying to be, you know, a decent human being and help other human beings by showing them the brutal, harsh realities of war through research, through what I know about our enemies, because I've researched them very in depth, as you all can see by, you know, if you listen to my stories, you know, you can pick up on all the subtleties of things I know about them and what they do. I know about their weapons and their capabilities of their weapons, and I merged that with my personal experiences of combat in Iraq to make masterpieces. Because I combined my personal, like, physical experience and that of also people around me too. I meshed that, I merged that with what their military capabilities are and their equipment and their weapon systems to make a masterpiece. So I did this channel for all the right reasons. I didn't do this for any personal gain. If anything, this damn channel's giving me a headache more than anything else. I stay up nights typing parts of the audiobook, and then I have to go right back through it and edit those things before I even read them to people. I stay up a long time working on this stuff, and I'm not doing it for any money. I'm either a madman or I'm a decent human being trying to help other people. Sometimes I don't even know. I'm joking, but you know what I'm saying. I really try to help other people with the abilities, with the God-given abilities I have. God created me as a soldier. That's what I am. That's what I've always been. Sorry, I have a cold. That's what I've always been, is a soldier, and that's what I always will be. That's what God made me to be. That's my purpose. That was my whole purpose in this life. When you've acquired your purpose. You know it in your soul. You know it in your spirit when you found your purpose, when you've acquired your purpose. When I was in the Army, before it was woke, those were some of the best years in my entire life. You don't understand. Like the Army, I was built for it. Like, it was my niche. It was where I fit. If I was a brick, I fit in that wall perfectly. I'll always be a soldier, whether I'm in the Army or whether I'm out of it. That's just what my profession was. Once a soldier, always a soldier. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what army you're in, whatever else. You're always a soldier because that was your profession. Just like if you're a baker or if you're a plumber or if whatever, you're always going to be that. So I'm always going to be a soldier because that was my profession. So that being said, I use those skills to help other people. And I really hope people recognize that there's a lot of vital information on this channel that people better take the time to really look at and study. Because I made this for other people. It's not for me. I made it for other people. Take it, use it, for your benefit. Learn from it. Study the concepts that are all, immensely articulated in it. I don't know how else to put it. There's so many concepts that I highlight in all my work. So many concepts. Subtle concepts and in-your-face concepts that everybody better pay attention to because it's reality, it's real life. It's all based on real life. It's not based on no fake shit. This is real life shit. Sorry, my soldier mouth's coming out, but that's how. I don't see the word shit as a curse word. It's just a synonym of feces. That's all it is. It's not no curse word. There's no magical book of curse words somewhere, it's ridiculous. But anyway, that's semantics. But there's so much vital information in all that work that people better pay attention to. They really better. It's very, very important to the survival of other people because, again, God said, my people perish for a lack of knowledge. You better learn. You better learn as much as you can, as fast as you can, because time's running out. Time's absolutely running out. Boy, you better learn. I'm telling you. You better seriously sit down and study all that stuff. Because it was made to benefit other people. I already know all that stuff. I made it. If the channel gets scrubbed, it gets scrubbed, I'm not saving that stuff. But you all can if you want to. That's for you. It's free. I made all that for you. It's all for you. I didn't do it. It ain't for me. I already know all of that. So I put all that work in for your benefit, for your survival. So please, use it. Use those resources. There's a lot of time and effort that went into those. Even just to draw some of the diagrams, and it takes time to sit there and actually sketch stuff out, and even to make the pictures and battle scenes for the typed out stories, and to write the scenario scripts for all the videos of the battle maps, and write a whole story for the civil conflict docuseries. Now I'm doing this really long audiobook that's over literally an entire day and a half long, over 36 hours in length by the time it's done. All this work, the editing and everything that has to be done for that, I mean, it's a lot of work. And it's all for free. I'm doing it all for free, It's my kingdom work for you all. Use it. Use it to your best advantage, I'm in a very serious mood today because I don't think people understand the real threat that I've been basically, shouting, like I said, from the rooftops about the CCP and Red China, the Red Dragon. They're the biggest threat there is. They are the biggest threat that we face, the Red Chinese. And so many people don't understand that. They won't grasp it until it's right over their head. They won't grasp it. They'll never understand that the red dragon in the Bible is China. It's China. They're the most powerful nation on the face of the earth, and I've gone over all the reasons for that so many times and so much of my past work that it doesn't bear repeating. I don't have to repeat it all again. You all understand why China's, in real terms, in very realistic terms, irrefutable, unchallengeable, realistic terms, China is the world superpower, the world hegemon. Some people say it's America, but that's only nominally, meaning it's fake. It's just in name only. We don't have any power anymore. We're a joke. We used to be strong, but we're not anymore. The eagle has fallen. The dragon has beefed up since the 90s. China, it's like night and day from what China used to be in the 90s and what it is now. Now it's a behemoth. It's a gigantic Leviathan dragon. It is a beast. It's the most powerful nation on the face of the earth in very real terms. Again, I've gone over all the numbers, the statistics, the factoids, the capabilities, everything that China has. They will crush us like an ant in World War III. And it's not even just going to be China. Russia will be with them, Pakistan, North Korea, Belarus, all their little allies, Iran, Syria, whoever else jumps in, Cuba, Nicaragua, they're all going to jump in, Venezuela. There's going to be a whole coalition of nations that obey China, and also even Russia, because Russia has some sway over the former Soviet republics. There's going to be a lot of countries that band together behind China and also Russia that come in here and stomp a mud hole in our ass. And there's not going to be a damn thing we can do about it because we're going to be so much weaker even than we already are now. We're tremendously weak right now. China could come stomping in here right now and take us over. But the only problem with that for them, in their mind, is they want to get right down to the business of strip mining this place, meaning that China basically wants to come in here and get right down to business of colonizing this place. They don't want to wait. They don't want to have to fight a big counterinsurgency campaign. So they're going to let us collapse and have an internal conflict so all our best fighting men slaughter each other for them so they don't have to worry about that. So it's like easy peasy when they come in here and colonize this place. They can start bringing in their civilian labor forces immediately to start taking all the resources, planting crops, everything, whatever they're going to do. Taking slaves and making them work. It'll be easy for them. They'll barely have to work for it then. As far as occupying this place after they've militarily crushed us, which that part's too easy. They'll do that in a few days. Just like my 96-hour invasion. And that's a best-case scenario for this country. Keep that in mind. My invasion series, where there's actually partisan uprisings, that is a best-case scenario for this country. Meaning that we actually didn't have a collapse and we didn't have an internal conflict. We just had hard economic times, but then China and Russia just came and stomped us. And then they occupied this place after they stomped us. Meaning that there were still American fighting men that could try and band together and make partisan groups for uprisings against the occupation. So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. That's a best case. And even the best case is horrible, because almost virtually nearly the entire country gets slaughtered or enslaved. And by the end of the hostilities, there's only 40 million people left remaining in this country. 40 million. That means that 300 million between that, there were 170 million slaughtered and the rest 130 taken as slaves. As slaves. 130 million, 170 million dead, slaughtered, genocided, taken out of the world. 40 million remained, and the country was left desolate. It was smashed from years of artillery and carpet munitioning from aircraft and just tank shells and anti-tank missiles and cruise missiles. Everything you can think of, they smashed this place into desolation. There was nothing left. And the Chinese just plundered everything and left. They decided to leave because, they said, you know what, the war's unpopular at home because, we lost some people to the civilian uprising, the partisans that fought back, or the former, military and armed civilians that banded together and made partisan groups. We lost so many, fighters. We lost, tens of thousands of our troops over time. China has millions of troops, but I'm saying even if they lose like tens of thousands, it'll be noticeable to their population because, they have to bury them and stuff, So that made the war unpopular, which made China decide to just say, hey, you know what? Let's quit while we're even ahead. Let's just plunder everything and leave. Leave this place as a broken, shithole that can never rebuild itself because it's literally been plundered of all its construction equipment. Everything else has been flattened and destroyed. There's no way these people can rebuild it. It'll be like the Flintstones. Flintstones, meet the Flintstones. Our tallest building will be made out of rubble, and it'll be like maybe 2 or 3 stories that some people rig up. It'll be like worse than Somalia if that happens. And that's a best case scenario where only 40 million people are still alive. 40 million out of 340 million. That's horrible. That's a terrible end. It's a terrible end, and they're spaced out around this huge landmass. So China just left because their people got tired of it, even though they could have stayed and never left and just finished off the rest of our population. They decided to leave to appease their people because they were getting angry that their relatives were getting wounded or dying in the war, just like every other war in history, like Vietnam and whatever else. It became unpopular. But in the real life, because we have a civil conflict first, and we rip ourselves up first. When China comes stomping in here and smashes us, guess what? Guess what? They can go straight into colonization. They don't have to fight a big counterinsurgency, and their people will never get tired of it because they're not going to lose shit. They're not going to lose nothing. Think about that. So I've been going a long time. I guess this really made up for my lack of a Friday show here. Okay, so all in all, this stream was a very serious stream. I took a very serious tone, but that's because things are serious. You're watching history being made. You're watching the West in its final death throes, throwing resources it can scarcely afford to get rid of to this proxy conflict, depleting its own militaries, especially their armies, of vital ammunition and systems. So now you have this situation where the West, being extremely weak and rope-a-doped from the Russians, now you basically are watching it all come to its finale. You're going to see China, the world superpower, who hasn't even done anything yet. They've not even acted yet. You're going to see China, the world superpower, once this whole thing in Eastern Europe's done with, they're going to basically smash all their opposition when it's their time to act. But before that, we're going to have a collapse an internal conflict, and then they're going to invade us. But I'm pretty sure that even before that happens, we're going to be seeing regional conflicts flare up, just like this proxy one that's been going on for almost a year. You're going to see more like that. You might even see something in the Middle East again, because of Saudi parting ways with us and going into the arms of China. You might even see some hanky-panky again in the Middle East. You might. You might. It's definitely something to watch. But guess what? Because China and Russia will guarantee Saudi Arabia's safety, because they can, because they're more powerful than we are now. Anything we try and do in the Middle East is going to backfire on us hard. Worse than all our failed wars and everything else. This proxy conflict is a massive failure, too. This has drained us of so many resources that we cannot replace. We literally cannot replace these things because we don't have the industrial capacity to. And it takes an immense amount of time to produce these items. And a lot of the components come from Communist China. Communist China! Yeah, our enemy. So they have back doors into everything. Keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. The CCP is the most insidious, most dangerous threat we face. Forget these Western elite asshats. They ain't shit. They ain't never going to be shit. The CCP is the most dangerous force we face because they have armies. Massive armies. In industry, the biggest industrial base in the entire world. The most gold. They can never be broke. They're about to shaft us out of the petrodollar and make a petro yuan. They already got their own financial transaction messaging system called SIPS. Russia has FSPS too, by the way. Japan's even making its own behind our back. They're probably going to join BRICS Plus and leave us. I saw that coming because China, they're scared of China. They know that China has feelings about them after what they did to China in World War II. And now that China's this giant, this massive superpower, this massive leviathan, they're scared of China. You know what they even did? The Japanese prime minister had a hotline installed from Tokyo to Beijing to try to avoid war with China because they know China will wax their ass. Japan can do nothing in the face of China. So Japan is going by the old mantra, if you can't beat them, join them. If you can't beat them, join them. So Japan's leaving us because we're now a bunch of losers and laughingstocks, and they're going to join the real superpower, China, by making their own financial transaction messaging system, having a hotline between them and Beijing to thaw relations between Japan and China. And eventually, they're going to join completely with BRICS Plus. They've already made the initial steps. It's already going to move forward. We are going to have allies leaving us left and right. Left and right. Even the German generals are saying this is madness, trying to give their vehicles that they can hardly afford to give at this point. They really need those vehicles, and they're trying to give them to this proxy conflict. They said it's madness. I'm sure the Germans didn't forget the outcome of World War II in 1945, when the Soviet army came all the way to Berlin. Not that the Germans weren't a mighty power. Germany was, they were a superpower in World War II. It took the whole world to defeat them, practically speaking. I mean, they did. So, basically, it's a cat, it's Porky. So basically, Germany remembers World War II, and so does Russia. I mean, Germany destroyed the USSR because you have to understand, the world was a different place in the 40s. The world was much different back then. The USSR wasn't as developed. Like Russia, which was the main Soviet republic. Russia wasn't that developed out in its eastern areas. Like, there weren't many large cities, and there wasn't a lot of industry until, like, right after World War II, when, during World War II, they began shipping whole factories to the east and resettling them. But you have to understand, back then, in the old Soviet Union in the 40s, it was different. Like, all the USSR's heavy industries, most of its population was in the west. Most of its developed areas was all in the West. Ukraine, Western Russia, the Baltic states, Belarus. And when the Nazis went in there, Germany smashed the USSR. Like, they were on the verge of crushing the USSR. They went all the way to Moscow. But then the Soviets rolled the Germans all the way back to Berlin, their capital. So, yes, while Germany was a mighty power back then, it's let its army go to shambles now. It ain't shit now. And Russia could come stomping in there and smash Germany and all of European NATO members. All of them combined. I've showed everybody the stats. I've read it all to you, the numbers. The numbers as it pertains to the combo of Germany, Italy, Britain, and France, and all their combined equipment and personnel compared to Russia's combined equipment and personnel. They're woefully outnumbered. All combined, they're woefully outnumbered. And all the tiny little European countries barely have any militaries anyway, so like it's not anything to add them. So they're like the West is woefully outmatched by Russia. Russia alone could stomp NATO. But then you throw in China, who's about 10 times bigger conventionally than Russia. They really are. They're massive. China's massive. You know, Russia's close on some levels of certain equipment, but China's just massive when you combine everything they have. Not even a chance. Not even a chance. So that's why I warn about China, and also about Russia. Russia's the number 2 power after China overall. They're a resource superpower, and they have the second strongest military conventionally, and they have the biggest nuke arsenal. So overall, and they have decent industry. They're, you know, like I said, it's a $5 trillion economy that sits on $75 trillion of natural resources in Russia. $75 trillion, that's the most in the world in terms of the dollar value. So basically, you've got Russia, who has a lot of, you know, the second biggest overall military industrial complex, combined with China, who has the biggest by far. That's like 3 times on average bigger than Russia's in terms of tank production, APCs, IFVs, and aircraft too. Ships, of course, too. China cranks out ships like it's nobody's business. So China's this giant behemoth in terms of everything. You know, they might have the 3rd biggest nuke arsenal, but they have the most effective means of delivery. They can cloak their missiles, IR cloaking and visual cloaking. They have the same paint, like the mirrored stealth suits. They have that same type of paint that they can camouflage their missiles with, along with IR paint to mask the IR signatures of the missiles. They can also, yeah, they have that. I've gone over all that before. They also have fractional orbital bombardment. That's like taking regular hypersonics to the next level, because they're flying around the whole world. And then for the terminal phase, they detach the hypersonic glide vehicle for the terminal phase of the attack. That's, wow. Yeah, that's some very high-tech means of delivery right there. Regular hypersonics are pretty damn advanced because they move at a high rate of speed and maneuver the whole way in random patterns. That's why they're so revolutionary. It's not just the high rate of speed, it's their maneuverability while they're doing it, and their unpredictable flight paths. That's why there's such a big deal about them. China has mastered those. Russia really has too. But China has taken it to the next level with fractional orbital bombardment systems that actually work. They've tested it a few times and it works. They fine-tuned it. And they have the 3rd biggest nuke arsenal, and they have enough to destroy 2 countries, which makes China still the world superpower. Because you combine that to their industry, their ginormous gargantuan paramilitary and active military forces combined, including reserves, active duty, paramilitary. They have 20 million men under arms, paramilitary forces of their different paramilitary branches, PAP, National Militia, Marine Militia, National Construction Corps, and the PLA Strategic Reserve, not to be confused with the regular PLA Army reserves of their regular military. 29 million men under arms, all combined. Because you have 5 million regular reserves for the regular military, 4 million active duty of their Air Force, Army, Navy, and Strategic Rocket Forces, which this is a Chinese Strategic Rocket Forces branch uniform. I like it because of the woodland pattern here. there's like 4 different Chi-Com Type 07 uniforms. You know, this is the Strategic Rocket Forces one. It's a good scheme. I like it. I also have a German uniform too, a Flecktarn pattern uniform, which is 5 color scheme, pine forest. I like these pine wood pattern uniforms. But anyhow, back to what I was saying. I was getting off track. But anyway, China has all this stuff, this industrial capacity, this ginormous military and paramilitary underarms, all this equipment. I've already read their equipment before. They have an insane amount of different equipment. They're like #1 in everything. And Russia, even though they're tied in artillery and pretty close in air defense, China still has just immensely more ammunition. They have more tanks, a lot more tanks than Russia. They have a lot more armored vehicles than Russia, like APCs, IFVs, MRAPs. Aircraft, fighters and fighter bombers, which are like your tactical ground attack aircraft, and strategic bombers, all combined in China's numbers. They have the biggest combat air fleet in terms of all the combat plane numbers combined, because of the sheer number of fighters and ground attack planes they have. They just have more than anybody. And then they have the second biggest overall strategic bomber fleet after Russia, but Russia doesn't have near as many fighters or ground attack planes as China. So China just has the biggest combat air fleet, biggest navy, biggest ground forces, just by an insane quantity. They're ginormous. So Russia's second biggest, but China is just China's a monster. So, and Russia's even growing their forces as a result of what's been going on. Their active duty military has been growing. They're adding a corps and a few divisions. So I've gone over that before too in recent lives. But anyway, I've been yapping. I've been going for 2.5 hours. I meant to get off like 30 minutes ago. I'm going to say my farewells to everybody before I get off. This was a really important stream. I hope people paid attention to it, because I've gone over a lot of things that people need to really pay attention to. Yeah, you're right, Ken. They are. They're very smart. They're very smart to do that, because China has them by the cojones. Hey, Rocket, like a redhead. Haven't seen you here before. Welcome. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Oh, thank you. Hey, Brogan. Yeah, yeah, it's time. It's time for a cigarette. Been going like 2 hours. Haven't had one. Yeah, I smoke tobacco. That's something I'm going to have to eventually quit, but, you know, I ain't perfect. I'm an ex-soldier. I deal with my issues how they come. You know, God willing, you know, I'll kick my vices bit by bit. It's all in God's time. But, yeah, oh, hey, Marianne, and hey, Coro Convertible. I haven't seen you in a long time. I'm glad you're here. Welcome. Good to see you. And MB and Wild Animus, of course, and, you know, yeah, MB and Wild Animus, you guys are cool, man. I'm glad you guys are here. And you too, Ken. Very glad you're here, Ken. And let's see, Ron Johnson. Hey, what's up, man? Good to see you. And Unorthodox, my friend, good to see you. And, of course, Brogan. And, well, I guess that's everybody. You all have a very, very good, blessed day. Thank you. Oh, hey, Blue Book. Welcome, Blue Book. I'm glad you're here, too. Well, thank you all for coming. You all have a great day.